Welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's story, I'd like to ask for your support. If you like documentaries, detective films, and true stories like this, please subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. It may seem like a small thing, but it helps YouTube recommend these videos to more people and helps the channel grow. Thank you. Now, let's talk about Lars Mittank. August 20th, 1966. A hill overlooking the Brazilian city of Niterói. The afternoon air is warm. The area is quiet, and two men are lying motionless on the ground. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. There are no obvious signs of violence, no blood, no struggle, no weapon. But then investigators notice something extraordinary. Both men are wearing homemade lead masks over their eyes. Why? No one knows. Nearby, investigators find a bottle of water and a handwritten note containing a series of cryptic instructions. Those instructions would become one of the most puzzling pieces of evidence in Brazilian criminal history. Because more than half a century later, no one knows exactly why those two men climbed that hill. And no one has ever determined with certainty what caused their deaths. The mystery became known as the Lead Masks Case. The location was known locally as Vintém Hill. It overlooked the city of Niterói below. To most people, it was simply another hill, but over the years, the area became linked to unusual stories. Some local residents spoke of unexplained lights, others described strange sightings, or unusual activity in the night sky. Whether any of those reports had anything to do with this case has never been established. But they became part of the mystery surrounding the hill, and part of the reason this case continues to fascinate people today. The bodies were discovered by a local teenager. At first, he assumed the two men were simply resting on the hillside. But something didn't feel right. The men never moved. Concerned, he later alerted adults. The authorities were notified. Soon, police arrived, and one of Brazil's most enduring mysteries officially began. Among the first things investigators noticed, there were no obvious signs of violence, no visible injuries, no bullet wounds, no knife wounds, no clear evidence of a physical attack. And yet, both men were dead. The victims were identified as Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz. Both were electronics technicians. Both lived in Campos dos Goitacazes. And both shared an unusual interest. They were fascinated by electronics, radio equipment, and electronic experiments. According to people who knew them, they also had an interest in spiritualism and attempts to explore unusual phenomena through technology. At first, that detail may not seem especially important, but it would later become a central part of many theories surrounding the case. Whether that connection was meaningful or merely a coincidence has never been conclusively established. When detectives searched the scene, they found one item that immediately drew their attention: a handwritten note. The message was brief, but remarkably strange. According to investigators, it appeared to contain a sequence of instructions, references to a specific time, instructions to take capsules, and a final instruction to wait for a signal while wearing the masks. The wording was cryptic, almost as though it referred to a plan already understood by the two men, but investigators never discovered exactly what the instructions meant, or what signal the note was referring to. Those questions remain unanswered to this day. The handwritten note quickly became one of the central pieces of evidence in the investigation, because it raised a troubling question. If the two men were following written instructions, who had written them? Were they carrying out someone else's plan? Or were the instructions simply reminders they had written for themselves? Investigators couldn't answer that question, and neither can we. But the answer matters, because it changes how we interpret everything else found on that hill. The masks, the capsules mentioned in the note, the timing, and the deaths themselves. Almost every major theory begins with that single unanswered question. Police soon began reconstructing the men's final known movements. Before traveling to Niterói, the two technicians told their families they needed to buy electronic equipment. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed alarming. It sounded like an ordinary business trip. But as investigators retraced their movements, questions began to emerge. The investigation never clearly established whether buying electronic equipment had truly been the purpose of the journey. Instead, the trail led investigators toward a series of unusual events. Purchases that seemed ordinary, a destination that wasn't, and a hill where the two men would be found dead only hours later. The deeper investigators looked, the less the trip made sense. Instead, witnesses later reported seeing the two men purchase waterproof raincoats before heading toward the hill. At first, that didn't seem especially important, but there was one unusual detail. The weather was warm, very warm. According to later reports, one witness even questioned why they needed raincoats that day. The two men bought them anyway, and when their bodies were discovered, both men were still wearing those raincoats. It was another small detail that seemed ordinary on its own, but in the context of everything else, it only made the mystery deeper. This is where the case becomes truly fascinating. Not because of what we know, but because of what we don't know. Every confirmed fact seems to raise two new questions: the masks, the handwritten note, the raincoats, the unexplained cause of death. Each clue feels important, yet none of them reveal the full picture. Instead, they seem to point in different directions. And that is often the hallmark of the most enduring mysteries. The more evidence you examine, the harder certainty becomes. As investigators dug deeper, they learned that the two men had reportedly taken part in unusual experiments in the past. Experiments involving electronic devices, radio equipment, and, according to people who knew them, an interest in spiritualism and attempts to explore unusual phenomena through technology. Exactly what those experiments involved remains unclear, and some accounts may have become more dramatic as the story spread over the years. Even so, those reports introduced an intriguing possibility. What if the two men climbed that hill expecting something unusual to happen? Not because investigators proved it, but because it was one of several theories people later considered while trying to explain the mystery. And like so much else in this case, it has never been conclusively established. And if that were true, what exactly were they waiting for? A signal? An experiment? Someone they expected to meet? Or something else entirely? No one has ever answered those questions with certainty, but they inspire decades of speculation. Journalists, researchers, and the public all tried to make sense of the evidence. Some of the theories were conventional. Others became increasingly unusual. Many were based on fragments of evidence, while others relied largely on speculation. More than half a century later, the truth remains as elusive as ever. But the most important question remained unanswered. What really killed them? The capsules mentioned in the note, the missing evidence, the theories linking the case to reported UFO sightings, possible mistakes made during the investigation, and the possibility that an important clue may have been overlooked from the very beginning. More than half a century later, those questions remain unanswered. Once investigators completed their first examination of the scene, one fact immediately stood out. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. The men's watches remained on their wrists. Money was still in their pockets. Their personal belongings appeared largely undisturbed. That detail mattered. It made robbery seem unlikely. If another person had been involved, financial gain did not appear to be the obvious motive. It was one more piece of evidence that investigators had to reconcile with everything else they had found. And like so many details in this case, it raised more questions than answers. The next mystery involved the capsules mentioned in the note. The handwritten instructions referred to taking capsules at a specific time, but investigators never recovered any capsules at the scene, nor did they find any container that clearly explained what the note was referring to. That created another mystery. Did the men actually take any capsules? If they did, what were they? And why was no trace of them ever found? Because of the condition of the bodies, investigators were never able to determine with certainty whether any substance had been consumed. More than half a century later, those questions remain unanswered. Unfortunately, another problem complicated the investigation. The autopsies failed to determine a clear cause of death. There were no obvious traumatic injuries, no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds. Nothing that immediately explained why two apparently healthy men had died side by side. Investigators also hoped toxicological testing might provide answers. But by the time the examinations were carried out, the bodies had deteriorated too severely for reliable toxicological conclusions. As a result, investigators were never able to determine with certainty whether any poison or other substance had played a role. It became one of the investigation's greatest limitations, and one of the reasons the mystery has never been fully solved. This case illustrates one of the most important principles of criminal investigation. Sometimes solving a mystery has less to do with brilliant detectives and more to do with time. Evidence does not wait. Chemical traces disappear. Biological evidence changes. Witness memories fade. Even a relatively short delay can permanently destroy crucial evidence. The lead masks case is a powerful reminder of how fragile evidence can be, and how easily the truth can become impossible to recover. Not because no one searched, but because time never stops. As investigators interviewed friends and relatives, another pattern slowly emerged. Neither Miguel nor Manuel appeared frightened before leaving home. Neither behaved like someone expecting violence. According to those who knew them, they seemed calm, focused, and determined to carry out whatever they had planned. That detail would later influence many of the theories surrounding the case. Because whatever they expected to happen, there was no indication they believed they were walking into immediate danger. And that single observation made the mystery even more difficult to explain. Investigators also examined the lead masks themselves. They were surprisingly simple, handmade, roughly cut from sheets of lead, without eye openings. They did not appear to have been designed as disguises. Instead, many researchers have suggested they were intended to provide some form of protection. Protection from what? Bright light? An electrical flash? Or something else entirely? No one has ever been able to answer that question with certainty. But one thing seemed clear. The masks appeared to have been made for a specific purpose. Whatever that purpose was, it died with the two men. At this point, the investigation reached a turning point. Several explanations had been proposed, but many of them fell into two broad categories. Either the two men had voluntarily taken part in some unusual activity or experiment, or someone else had played a significant role in the events that led to their deaths. Both possibilities had evidence that seemed to support them, and both left important questions unanswered. Neither explanation could account for every known fact. That is precisely why this case has endured for decades. Not because there are no theories, but because none of them fully explains the evidence. And that is what keeps the mystery alive. Perhaps the most important lesson of this case has nothing to do with lead masks. It has to do with the way our minds work. Human beings dislike incomplete stories. Our brains naturally search for patterns, for explanations, for endings that make sense. When information is missing, we instinctively begin filling in the gaps, sometimes with logic, sometimes with imagination. The less evidence a mystery contains, the more theories people tend to create. But more theories do not necessarily bring us closer to the truth. Sometimes, they carry us even farther away. The lead masks case reminds us that uncertainty is often harder to accept than not knowing. And yet, the investigation was about to take an unexpected turn. As the story spread, new theories began to emerge. Some people linked the case to reports of unexplained lights seen in the region. Others focused on the men's reported interest in spiritual experiments. And before long, speculation about extraterrestrial involvement began to appear. None of those ideas were ever proven, but they transformed the case from an unexplained death investigation into one of the world's most debated mysteries. And one theory in particular would capture the public imagination for decades. As news of the mysterious death spread across Brazil, theories began appearing almost immediately. Some were grounded in the available evidence. Others were far more speculative. The challenge for investigators was separating evidence from interpretation. That proved far more difficult than anyone expected, because every confirmed fact seemed compatible with more than one explanation. The lead masks, the handwritten note, the capsules mentioned in the note, the unknown cause of death. Each clue appeared significant, yet none of them pointed toward a single conclusion. And that is exactly what has kept this mystery alive for nearly 60 years. One of the earliest explanations suggested that the two technicians may have voluntarily taken part in an unusual experiment. According to this theory, they believed the experiment might produce some kind of unusual psychological, spiritual, or sensory experience. Several details appeared to support that interpretation. The journey seems to have been planned in advance. The handwritten note contained a sequence of timed instructions, and the lead masks had been deliberately prepared. There was no clear evidence that the men expected a physical attack, but their emotional state remains difficult to reconstruct. One witness later recalled that Miguel appeared nervous and repeatedly checked his watch. If the experiment theory is correct, the men may have believed they understood what was about to happen. They may even have expected to leave the hill safely. Instead, something went terribly wrong. But exactly what happened has never been established. Another theory focused on the capsules mentioned in the handwritten note, because investigators never determined what those capsules, if they existed, might have contained. Several possibilities were proposed. Some suggested they contained medication. Others proposed hallucinogenic or psychoactive substances. Still others argued that the capsules may have had nothing to do with the men's deaths at all. The problem was simple. Without reliable toxicological evidence, none of those possibilities could be confirmed, and none could be confidently ruled out. Like so many other details in the lead masks case, the capsules remain an unanswered question. This case illustrates a common mistake people make when thinking about investigations. We often assume that missing evidence supports the theory we already believe. In reality, missing evidence usually supports nothing at all. It simply creates uncertainty, and uncertainty invites imagination. Good investigations resist that temptation. They distinguish between what is known and what is merely possible. They acknowledge the evidence, they acknowledge the gaps, and they never confuse the two. That distinction is often the difference between solving a mystery and creating one. Perhaps the most famous theory involved unidentified flying objects. Over the years, reports of unexplained lights in the area around Vintem Hill became closely associated with the case. As those stories spread, some people suggested that Miguel and Manuel had climbed the hill expecting to witness an unidentified aerial phenomenon. According to that theory, the lead masks had been made to protect their eyes from an intense flash of light. It is certainly one of the most memorable explanations. But it is also important to separate theory from evidence. No direct evidence has ever demonstrated that such an event occurred that night, nor has any evidence established a connection between reported lights in the area and the deaths of the two men. The theory remains part of the legend surrounding the case, not a conclusion reached by the investigation. Another possibility received far less attention. What if the lead masks had a completely practical purpose? Lead has long been used as a shielding material in certain scientific, medical, and industrial applications. That fact led some researchers to ask an interesting question. Could the two men have misunderstood or misapplied a technical concept? Could they have believed the masks offered protection they did not actually provide? Over the years, a number of practical explanations have been proposed, but none has been supported by conclusive evidence. Like every major theory in the lead masks case, it remains a possibility rather than a proven conclusion. As the years passed, the investigation gradually slowed. No new forensic evidence emerged, no reliable confession ever surfaced, and no witness was able to reliably account for the men's final hours on Vintem Hill. The mystery endured because its most important questions remained unanswered. Who wrote the note? What did the capsules refer to? Why were the lead masks necessary? And above all, what caused the deaths? More than half a century later, those questions remain unanswered. Educationally, this case offers another valuable lesson. People often judge theories by how interesting they are. Good investigations judge theories by how well they fit the available evidence. Those are not the same thing. An exciting theory can still be wrong. A simple explanation can still be correct. The real challenge is remaining intellectually honest when certainty is impossible. Accepting what the evidence supports, acknowledging what it does not, and having the discipline to leave some questions unanswered. And yet, one final contradiction remains. The more investigators learned about the two technicians, the less likely it seemed that they had climbed Vintem Hill without a purpose. Whatever brought them there, it appears to have been important to them. The question that has endured for decades is not simply whether they expected something to happen. It is whether what they expected ever happened at all. Because if it did, no one lived to explain it. And if it didn't, the mystery becomes even harder to understand. One question has remained unanswered since 1966. Was this an accident? A failed experiment? Or part of a plan that investigators never fully understood? Every major theory accounts for some of the evidence. None accounts for all of it. And that is why the case remains unsolved. Not because there are no theories, but because no single theory fits every known fact. My own conclusion is a cautious one. Looking only at the verified evidence, one interpretation appears more consistent than many of the others. Miguel and Manuel most likely climbed Vintem Hill voluntarily. They arrived with items they appeared to consider important. They followed a handwritten sequence of instructions. And there is no clear evidence that they expected to become victims of a violent attack. Instead, Their actions suggest they believed they were about to witness or take part in something they considered important. What that something was remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in the entire case. Some mysteries are eventually solved. Others slowly fade into history. But a few continue challenging generations of investigators, researchers, and curious minds. The lead masks case is one of them. Not because it offers extraordinary answers, but because it forces us to confront extraordinary questions. And unless those questions are ever answered, two handmade lead masks resting on a lonely Brazilian hill will remain one of the most haunting symbols of the unknown. A reminder that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not the ones with the fewest clues, but the ones whose clues never fit together. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support really helps the channel grow and allows me to create more documentaries like this. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss future videos. If you'd like to watch more mysteries, disappearances, and true stories, be sure to check out the other videos on the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.